The Council's last hope. The Great Chamber of the Galactic Council was a marvel of engineering and diplomacy, an immense dome that shimmered with the light of 1,000 holographic projections. Delegates from every corner of the galaxy filled the chamber, their varied forms ranging from towering insectoids to shimmering beings of pure energy. Yet, despite the technological grandeur and diversity, the atmosphere was heavy with despair. The war against the Krell Dominion had raged for over a century. The Krell, a ruthless race of bioengineered conquerors, were relentless. Planet by planet, they crushed resistance with overwhelming force, leaving entire civilizations in ruins. The Galactic Alliance, formed in desperation, had thrown every resource into the conflict, but the Krell's brutal efficiency outpaced them at every turn. Now, with the core worlds under siege, the Council convened to discuss their final desperate options. At the center of the chamber, a towering hologram displayed the bleak situation. Planets marked in red had fallen to the Krell, forming a creeping tide that threatened the heart of the galaxy. A soft murmur of despair rippled through the assembly as the latest updates appeared. The red tide was advancing faster than anyone could have predicted. "Enough," bellowed a voice, cutting through the noise like a blade. The assembly turned toward the source. It was General Cawthron, a grizzled veteran from the avian Avari species. His once proud plumage was now streaked with gray, his eyes sharp with defiance. "We cannot sit here and wallow in despair while the Krell devour our worlds. We need solutions, not defeatism." A representative from the crystalline, Sharn Collective rose, her voice resonating like chimes. "What solutions, General? Every fleet we send is obliterated. Our greatest weapons are no match for their bioships. We are running out of time and resources." A ripple of agreement spread through the chamber. The Council was teetering on the edge of hopelessness when an unexpected voice spoke. "There is another option." All eyes turned to the speaker, a small, unassuming figure seated at the edge of the assembly. Ambassador Elias Kane, a lone human representative. Humanity, a relatively young species in the galactic community, had not yet been invited to join the Alliance formally. Their presence was tolerated but rarely respected. Kane's calm, measured tone contrasted sharply with the rising tension in the room. "The Terran Confederation has been monitoring this war for decades," Kane continued. "We've studied the Krell. We understand their tactics, their weaknesses. Humanity can help." A wave of skepticism and indignation swept through the chamber. "Help?" scoffed a reptilian delegate from the Drakari Dominion. "What could your backward species possibly offer that we, with all our advanced technology, cannot?" Kane remained composed, his gaze steady. "Perspective," he said simply. "You've been fighting the Krell with the same strategies for decades, hoping for different results. Humanity doesn't have the luxury of advanced technology or vast fleets. We've learned to win through adaptability, ingenuity, and, when necessary, ruthlessness." The chamber erupted into chaos. Accusations, doubts, and outright insults were hurled at Kane. Yet, amid the uproar, a few voices of reason emerged. "Let him speak," said General Cawthron, his sharp gaze fixed on Kane. "What exactly is humanity proposing?" Kane stood, his presence somehow commanding despite his modest stature. "We propose an alliance. Give us operational control of a combined task force, and we'll end this war." The room fell silent. The sheer audacity of the proposal left the delegates stunned. For a moment, it seemed as if Kane's words would be dismissed outright. But then, a delegate from the Zithari, a telepathic race known for their neutrality, spoke. "What do you require, Ambassador Kane?" she asked, her voice echoing in the minds of everyone present. Kane didn't hesitate. "Full cooperation from the Galactic Alliance. Access to your fleets, technology, and intelligence. And most importantly, the authority to act without interference." The chamber exploded again, but this time the debate was fierce and focused. The idea of handing control to humanity was unthinkable to many, but desperation had a way of shifting perspectives. Over hours of heated discussion, The cracks in the opposition began to show. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the council voted. The decision was far from unanimous, but it passed. Humanity would be given a chance to prove itself. As the session adjourned, Kane stood at the center of the chamber, surrounded by an air of quiet determination. "Prepare your fleets," he said. "We move at dawn." For the first time in decades, there was a glimmer of hope in the Great Chamber. Humanity had entered the war, and the galaxy was about to learn what that truly meant. The human strategy unveiled. The Galactic Alliance fleet hung in low orbit above the scorched remains of Thalon Prime, one of the last remaining bastions before the Krell could breach the core worlds. Thick clouds of smoke and ash drifted through the atmosphere below, a grim reminder of the devastation that awaited if the Krell continued unchecked. From the bridge of the triumphant dawn, Ambassador Elias Kane stood beside General Catharin, both staring at the tactical display projected in front of them. "This world will fall within the week," Catharin muttered, his beak twitching with frustration. "Our fleets are battered, our defenses stretched too thin. Even if we muster every remaining ship, we can't hold them off." Kane studied the holographic display in silence. Red markers representing the Krell fleets slowly encircled the system like predators closing in on weakened prey. The Alliance ships, marked in blue, were outnumbered 5-1. In traditional warfare, this was a death sentence, but humanity rarely fought by the book. "We're not going to defend Thalon Prime," Kane said calmly. Catharin snapped his head toward Kane, feathers ruffling in disbelief. "You propose we abandon it. There are still 5 million civilians on that planet. They'll be slaughtered if we retreat. We won't abandon them. We'll draw the Krell in, then eliminate them." Kane's voice was firm, each word carefully measured. The alien general narrowed his eyes, skeptical but intrigued. "Explain." Kane expanded the projection, zooming in on the orbital paths around Thalon Prime. He highlighted a small, unremarkable cluster of moons orbiting the planet. The Krell's strength lies in overwhelming force. They don't rely on defensive maneuvers or subtlety. They drive forward, crushing everything in their path. That makes them predictable. We're going to use that against them. Catharin's eyes flicked between the moons and the projected Krell advance. How? Kane activated a secondary projection, revealing schematics of Terran weapon platforms, sleek, angular constructs bristling with unfamiliar weaponry. They were far smaller than the colossal warships of the Galactic Alliance, but brimming with dense firepower. "These are Hellstorm array platforms," Kane began. "They're orbital siege stations designed for planetary defense, but we've modified them for this engagement. When the Krell arrive, we'll position the platforms on the dark side of these moons. Their bioships will enter orbit expecting minimal resistance. Once they commit their full force, we'll strike." Catharin's expression hardened as realization dawned. "A trap." "Exactly. But it won't just be the platforms. The Terran fleet will engage them head-on, luring them deeper into the system. When the Krell fully commit, we trigger the orbital arrays, cutting off their escape routes. From there, it becomes a war of attrition, one they can't win." Catharin stared at Kane, analyzing him as if seeing the human for the first time. "You're betting everything on their aggression." "It's not a bet, General," Kane replied. "It's a certainty. The Krell have won every battle by pressing forward relentlessly. It's time someone made them pay for their overconfidence." A silence lingered between them, heavy with the weight of unspoken doubts. Finally, Catharin gave a slow nod. "You're either a genius or a fool, Kane. I suppose we'll find out soon enough." 3 days later, the Krell fleet emerged from slip space with terrifying precision, dozens of organic warships dropping into formation around Thalon Prime like vultures circling a carcass. The lead vessel, a titanic dreadnought, crackled with bioelectric energy, casting faint arcs of purple lightning across the void. From the observation deck of the triumphant dawn, Kane watched the Krell arrive. His expression betrayed nothing. Calm, analytical, patient. Around him, Alliance officers bristled with tension. They're not wasting time, Cawthorne observed, his voice tight. No, they won't, Kane replied. Initiate Phase 1. The Alliance fleet moved into position, engaging the Krell as expected. Blue and red markers collided on the tactical display, a chaotic swirl of light and destruction. The Terran fleet led the charge, smaller but far more maneuverable than their alien counterparts. Unlike the massive, sluggish Alliance ships, the Terran vessels danced through enemy fire with brutal efficiency. Kane's voice cut through the comms network. Focus on their escorts. Don't waste fire on the dreadnoughts yet. Throughout the chaos, the Hellstorm platforms remained silent, concealed by the moon's shadows. The Krell, blinded by their own aggression, failed to notice the growing net of destruction tightening around them. As the battle raged on, the Krell dreadnought pushed forward, descending into low orbit over Thelon Prime. Cawthorne shifted uncomfortably. Their main fleet is almost fully committed. Are you sure they won't detect the platforms? They will, Kane replied, his eyes fixed on the dreadnought. But by the time they do, it won't matter. Moments later, the Krell's lead dreadnought crossed the threshold Kane had been waiting for. A subtle shift appeared on the display, indicating the perfect moment. Trigger the platforms. The dark side of the moons erupted in light. Hellstorm platforms emerged from hiding, unleashing concentrated beams of plasma and kinetic railfire. The Krell dreadnought's shields flickered violently as the unexpected assault struck from multiple angles. Within seconds, the void of space became a killing ground. Kane's voice, calm but resolute, echoed across the comms. All ships, press the attack. Drive them toward the platforms. The Krell, now aware of the trap, tried to maneuver out of range. But the Alliance fleet tightened the noose, forcing them deeper into the kill zone. In minutes, several Krell cruisers had been reduced to drifting wreckage. Cawthorne turned to Kane, his eyes wide with disbelief. They're scattering. That's the point, Kane replied. Pick them off one by one. No survivors. As the last of the Krell ships disintegrated under concentrated fire, Cawthorne exhaled slowly. I underestimated you, Kane. I think we all did. Kane's gaze remained fixed on the battlefield. You're not the first. Humanity's unseen weapons. The aftermath of the battle above Thelon Prime left the galactic community stunned. Word spread like wildfire. Humans, the species once dismissed as primitive, had dismantled a Krell armada in mere hours. But for Ambassador Elias Kane and his Terran fleet, this was just the beginning. The Galactic Alliance convened once more aboard the triumphant Dawn, its war chamber now occupied by representatives eager to hear Kane's next move. The chamber hummed with anticipation as holograms of various battlefields flickered to life above the long table at the center. The Krell were regrouping, but they had suffered a wound far deeper than the loss of ships: psychological dominance. For the first time in decades, the predators had become prey. Kane stood at the head of the table, his sharp gaze dissecting the projections as General Cawthorne addressed the room. Our forces have reported Krell retreats across multiple systems, Cawthorne said, tapping a glowing display. They're consolidating near the Keelar Expanse, where their main production centers lie. We suspect they're bracing for retaliation. A delegate from the Crystalline, Sharn Collective, shifted nervously. Retaliation? Surely not. We've weakened them, but attacking the Keelar Expanse is suicide. It's their most heavily fortified sector. Kane's lips curled slightly. That's exactly why we'll strike there next. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of disbelief. Delegates shouted over one another, their collective panic echoing through the room. Cawthorne remained silent, arms crossed as he observed Kane with growing curiosity. A serpentine representative from the Yeri Syndicate hissed, "Even with this victory, attacking the heart of the Dominion is reckless. You'll lead us to ruin." Kane stepped forward, calm in the face of chaos. His voice, smooth and deliberate, carried the weight of certainty. "You're all still thinking in the old ways," Kane said, gesturing toward the projection of Keelar Expanse. The Krell thrive on fear and force, but they rely on predictable strategies. You gather fleets, they crush them. You defend planets, they starve you out. But their strength is also their weakness. They do not prepare for subversion. He expanded the hologram, zooming in on a specific planet deep within the expanse. The surface shimmered under the display's blue tint, revealing massive organic structures, Krell shipyards, and bioweapon facilities. Terran warfare isn't about brute strength. It's about undermining the enemy from within, Kane explained. We won't face the Krell head-on in Killar. We'll break them piece by piece, dismantling their infrastructure until they crumble under their own weight. Catherine leaned forward, talons tapping against the table thoughtfully. You mean sabotage? Kane nodded. Sabotage, psychological warfare, and misinformation. This is how humanity fights wars we cannot win by numbers alone. He shifted the display once more, revealing schematics of Terran infiltration units, sleek, agile starships equipped with stealth technology unknown to the Alliance. At first glance, they looked unremarkable, but to the trained eye, they were deadly instruments of disruption. These are Spectre-class infiltration ships, Kane continued. Equipped with phased disruption fields, they're invisible to standard Krell detection grids. We'll send them in advance to disable key facilities, assassinate high-ranking Krell commanders, and spread false information throughout their networks. By the time they realize what's happening, it will be too late. The room fell into silence as the magnitude of the plan settled over the delegates. A delegate from the Zithari, her translucent form shimmering faintly, finally spoke. You propose striking at the Krell's heart with ghosts and whispers. Do you truly believe this will succeed? Kane's eyes met hers. It already has. The battle for Thalon Prime wasn't just about destroying their fleet. It was a test. The Krell believed they were invincible, but now they know otherwise. Fear has begun to take root. We'll water it until it consumes them. Catherine's beak twitched in amusement. Terrifying. And brilliant. 2 weeks later, Killar Expanse. In the deep void beyond the Killar Expanse, space remained eerily silent. No massive fleets of warships, no signs of approaching dreadnoughts, only shadows and drifting debris from smaller skirmishes long forgotten. Within this silence, the Spectre-class ship Ghostwind drifted silently toward the Krell shipyards on Killar 5. Its matte black hull reflected no light, and its engines emitted no detectable energy signature. Inside the ship, Lieutenant Adrian Blake, head of the infiltration unit, observed the looming Krell station through the forward viewport. Organic spires stretched like jagged bones against the pale glow of the distant star. Below, tendrils extended from the station, birthing new warships from massive bioorganic cradles. This is insane, whispered Ensign Valen, seated beside Blake. We're flying into the heart of the Dominion with nothing but knives and shadows. Blake smirked. That's all humanity ever needed. Their orders were clear. Disable the biocradle relays, destabilize the shipyard's power core, and assassinate the overseeing Krell War Marshal. As they approached, the Ghostwind phased into invisibility. The shipyard's defenses remained silent, oblivious to the Terran craft slipping into the network of docking bays. Blake and his team disembarked, clad in advanced infiltration suits that bent light around their forms. Through the corridors of the Krell station, the humans moved like wraiths. Guards passed by them, unaware of the death stalking their halls. In a matter of hours, critical systems across the station began to fail. Power grids flickered, and defensive networks collapsed without warning. By the time the Krell realized the infiltration, it was already over. Explosions rippled across the shipyard as the Terran agents vanished into the dark, leaving behind nothing but devastation and confusion. Galactic Alliance War Chamber, days later. Reports streamed into the war chamber aboard the Triumphant Dawn. One after another, Krell production lines failed. Communication hubs collapsed. Panic spread through their ranks as their empire began unraveling from within. Catherine stared at Kane, an expression of astonishment crossing his features. Your people don't wage war, Kane. They hunt. Kane gave a small smile. It's not about the strength of the enemy, General. It's about making them realize they were never as strong as they believed. And across the galaxy, the Krell were learning that lesson the hard way. The Krell's descent into chaos. The killer expanse burned. Fires from destabilized biocradles lit up the void, casting eerie shadows over the smoldering wreckage that drifted through space. For the first time in living memory, the Krell Dominion's industrial heartland, once thought impenetrable, lay in ruins. Across the sector, Dominion forces scrambled to contain the chaos, but the damage ran deeper than physical destruction. Communications blackouts spread across the Empire, sown by false transmissions and misinformation planted by Terran infiltration teams. Every fleet commander received conflicting orders, every planetary governor suspected betrayal, and no one trusted the channels they once relied on. It wasn't just sabotage, it was psychological warfare on a galactic scale. From the command deck of the Triumphant Dawn, Ambassador Elias Kane stood with General Cawthron, observing the deteriorating situation through the swirling projections of the galactic map. Red pulses marked the systems where Dominion forces faltered, and with each day, those red pulses spread. They're unraveling faster than I anticipated, Cawthron muttered, his talons tapping the table thoughtfully. The Krell are powerful, but they've never faced an enemy willing to rip them apart from the inside. That's because the galaxy's been fighting them the wrong way, Kane replied. His eyes, cold and calculating, never left the display. You try to match them in open battle, but the Krell thrive on those engagements. We operate in the shadows, where they're weakest. And the best part. Kane turned toward Cawthron, a faint smirk on his lips. They have no idea how to fight back. Krell Dominion flagship, Karos Prime Orbit. The interior of the Krell flagship, Dominion's Wrath, pulsed with the sickly bioluminescence native to their bioengineered vessels. War Marshal Xeroth stood before a massive organic war table, his crimson tendrils twitching in agitation. Reports flickered across the living surface. Fleet losses, compromised facilities, sabotage in their most secure sectors. His personal guards shifted nervously along the edges of the chamber. The War Marshal's fury was legendary, and no one dared draw attention to themselves. How? Xeroth snarled, slamming his clawed fist onto the war table. How is this happening? One of his subordinates stepped forward, keeping his gaze low. We suspect the humans, War Marshal. They're infiltration vessels. Humans. Xeroth's voice darkened with rage. Those fragile, primitive creatures. No, this reeks of treachery from within. Someone has betrayed us. But, War Marshal. Xeroth's talons lashed out, severing the subordinate's throat in one swift motion. The body collapsed to the floor, staining the organic floor beneath it. The room fell into heavy silence. Xeroth's eyes narrowed. Deploy execution squads to our border colonies. Let the people see the price of failure. Burn entire worlds if necessary. The Dominion will not be humiliated by lesser beings. War Marshal, another officer interjected hesitantly. If we begin purging our own, it may fracture stability across our ranks. Then let them fracture. Xeroth growled. The strong will remain. The weak deserve nothing but death. Even as he spoke, Xeroth felt the cold gnaw of doubt creeping in. Deep within his mind, a question lingered. Had the humans truly become a threat? Deep space, Krell territory. While the Krell hunted phantoms within their own ranks, Terran operatives continued their silent war. Aboard the stealth frigate Black Dagger, Commander Adrian Blake monitored the slow collapse from a safe distance. The ship drifted beyond the edge of the Karos system, cloaked by Terran phase technology, its crew watching as Dominion ships systematically turned on one another. Blake leaned back in his chair, the flickering light from the tactical display casting shadows across his face. They're tearing themselves apart, he said softly, speaking into the open comms link connected to Kane's channel. Good, Kane's voice replied, distant but unwavering. Maintain observation. If they regroup, we'll scatter them again." Blake hesitated for a moment. "We've hit them hard, Ambassador, harder than anyone thought possible. But I have to ask, what's the endgame? How far are we taking this?" Kane's response was immediate, as if he had anticipated the question. "We take it all the way, Commander. The Krell won't stop until they believe they can never win against humanity. That's the lesson we're teaching them, permanently." Galactic Alliance War Council. 1 week later. Back aboard the triumphant Dawn, the Galactic Alliance's highest-ranking officials reconvened. Delegates who had once doubted Kane now listened attentively, their earlier skepticism replaced with quiet reverence. A projection of Krell territory flickered in the center of the chamber. The red tide that once represented Krell dominance now appeared fragmented, with wide breaches opening along their borders. Catharin stood beside Kane, addressing the assembly. "As of yesterday, Krell forces have withdrawn from 3 bordering systems without firing a shot. The Dominion's grip on outer territories is loosening. This is unprecedented." One of the Sharn delegates, her crystalline form shimmering faintly, leaned forward. "Ambassador Kane, you've turned the tide in ways none of us thought possible. But I fear the Krell will retaliate with desperate measures. We need to prepare for an invasion of core worlds. If cornered, they may attempt to break our unity by force." Kane stepped forward, his gaze sweeping across the assembly. "Let them try. The Dominion's strength lies in fear and brutality, but they've underestimated us from the beginning. We'll make sure that mistake haunts them forever." He deactivated the hologram and folded his hands behind his back. The Krell believed this war would be their ascension to ultimate galactic power. Instead, it will be their extinction. A quiet murmur passed through the chamber, the weight of his words settling heavily over the gathered leaders. Catharin's eyes gleamed with something unfamiliar. "Hope. And if they don't surrender?" Catharin asked, though the question was more rhetorical than anything. Kane's expression hardened. "Then we end them. Completely." Across the galaxy, the Krell Dominion felt the edges of their empire crack and splinter. For the first time in history, they faced an enemy that didn't just survive their onslaught. They thrived in the face of it. The fall of the Krell war machine. The Krell Dominion was fracturing. Across the Outer Rim territories, Dominion fleets disintegrated into rogue factions, and once loyal commanders carved out their own warlord states. Krell colonies burned, not from the weapons of the Galactic Alliance, but from within, as the Dominion's brutal purge spiraled into civil unrest. Entire planets rebelled, driven to the breaking point by the relentless psychological warfare orchestrated by the Terran Confederation. But Elias Kane knew this wasn't the end. The Krell were cornered, but a cornered beast was most dangerous. On the observation deck of the triumphant Dawn, Kane stood beside General Catharin, his sharp eyes fixed on the swirling debris fields of the Kilar expanse displayed in the distance. Through the viewport, the shattered remnants of the once mighty Krell shipyards drifted silently, monuments to a power that no longer seemed so absolute. Catharin shifted beside him, feathers ruffling with quiet unease. "You've driven them into chaos, Kane. But even a crumbling empire can lash out. I suspect Exeroth will not go quietly into oblivion." Kane's gaze never left the burning stars beyond. "He won't. That's why we're going to finish this now, before he has the chance to retaliate." Catharin's beak clicked thoughtfully. "You plan to strike Kairos Prime." Kane gave a faint nod. "Kairos Prime is their last true stronghold. If we take it, the Dominion collapses." A low murmur swept through the Alliance officers gathered on the bridge. Kairos Prime wasn't just the capital of the Krell Dominion, it was the spiritual heart of their empire. Attacking it was akin to striking Earth itself. Catharin narrowed his eyes. "The Krell will defend Kairos Prime with everything they have left. It's no longer a military objective, it's a symbol of survival for them. Which is exactly why we need to take it," Kane said, voice cold and unyielding. "When Kairos Prime falls, the Dominions will shatter. There will be no one left to rally their forces." Catherine hesitated, then exhaled slowly. Then I hope your strategy is as ruthless as you are, Kane. Kane's smirk was barely perceptible. Ruthlessness has gotten us this far. Let's not change now. 3 days later, orbit of Keros Prime. The sky above Keros Prime boiled with activity. The Krull's remaining fleets clustered tightly around their homeworld, forming a defensive wall of organic warships and dreadnoughts that pulsed with bioelectric energy. Space stations drifted ominously, their spiked exteriors bristling with anti-orbital cannons and boarding pods. From the shadows beyond the system, the Terran fleet waited. Cloaked and silent, they watched the Krull's movements, every maneuver tracked and analyzed. Aboard the stealth carrier Iron Talon, Commander Adrian Blake surveyed the enemy formations. His eyes narrowed as the tactical grid unfolded before him. "This is it," Blake muttered, fingers tightening around the console. "The heart of the Dominion." Through the comlink, Kane's voice crackled to life. "We won't need to break through that blockade, Commander. We're not here to win by force." Blake's eyes flicked to the shimmering projection of Keros Prime, focusing on the dense urban sprawl spread across the surface. "Infiltration." Kane's reply was calm, yet the weight behind his words felt like a hammer strike. "Total subjugation." Blake raised an eyebrow. "You mean occupation?" "No," Kane said, voice lowering. "I mean dismantling their identity. From within." Keros Prime. Surface level. Terran infiltration teams slipped through the darkened corridors of the Krull capital city, their forms nearly invisible beneath adaptive cloaks. Keros Prime was unlike any other Krull world, a labyrinth of living structures, bioengineered towers that twisted unnaturally toward the skies. Thick fog drifted through the streets, laced with bioluminescence from the organic structures lining the pathways. War Marshal Xaroth stood in the Dominion Citadel, surrounded by his highest generals. His cold gaze swept over the reports flooding in from the outer colonies. The Dominion's collapse was accelerating, and now, for the first time, Kane's name carried a weight that even Xaroth could not ignore. "We should abandon the outer systems and consolidate what remains of our forces here," one of Xaroth's lieutenants suggested. "If we hold Keros Prime, the Dominion can rebuild." Xaroth's talons twitched. "No, there will be no rebuilding. Humanity must pay for this humiliation." As if summoned by the mention of their name, the Terran infiltration began. Across Keros Prime, power grids failed. Broadcasts collapsed into static. Bioweapon facilities spontaneously overloaded, triggering cascading explosions that rippled across the capital's outskirts. Panic surged through the population as distorted human messages flooded Krull communications, voices whispering of doom and despair. Terran operatives moved like shadows through the chaos, systematically dismantling the very infrastructure that held the planet together. Strategic command centers were sabotaged, data networks corrupted beyond repair. By the time the Krull military mobilized, their chain of command had disintegrated. The final blow. In orbit, the Terran fleet watched as the planet's defenses faltered. One by one, the Krull ships lost coordination, drifting aimlessly as the last remains of Dominion authority unraveled before their eyes. Catherine, watching from the command deck, shook his head in disbelief. "You're not just destroying their empire, Kane. You're erasing it from existence." Kane's expression was unreadable. The Krull built their empire on terror and domination. Now, they're tasting what it feels like to be powerless. Below, the Dominion Citadel crumbled as Terran orbital strikes rained down. War Marshal Xaroth stood in the collapsing command chamber, his once mighty fleets burning in the skies overhead. As the walls crumbled around him, he whispered a single word: "Impossible." But it wasn't. It was inevitable. Galactic Alliance Summit. Weeks later. The war was over. Delegates from across the galaxy gathered in the great chamber of the Alliance, their gazes fixed on the human ambassador standing at the center of the room. Kane's expression was calm as he addressed the assembly. "The Dominion is gone. Humanity does not seek to conquer. We did what was necessary to end the bloodshed and ensure it never happens again." Silence hung heavy over the chamber until Catherine rose. "You haven't just ended a war, Kane. You've rewritten galactic history." Kane gave a small nod. "Let's hope we've rewritten it for the better." As the session adjourned, Kane stood alone for a brief moment, gazing out at the stars beyond the chamber's glass walls. The galaxy would remember this war, and it would remember humanity. The ghost of the Krell Dominion. The stars over Keros Prime shone brighter than ever, without the faint hum of orbital shipyards and biocradle production facilities blotting out the light. The sky above the former heart of the Krell Dominion felt eerily peaceful. But below, the streets of the once proud capital were anything but serene. It had been 3 weeks since the fall of Keros Prime. The war was officially over. The Krell Dominion, once the most feared empire in the galaxy, lay in ruins. Yet, Ambassador Elias Kane knew better than to celebrate prematurely. Empires didn't die in a day. Their ghosts lingered. Kane stood atop the shattered balcony of what was once the Dominion Citadel, overlooking the sprawling ruins that stretched to the horizon. Fires still flickered in the lower districts. Krell civilians gathered in the streets below, scavenging through the remnants of their once glorious capital. Beside him, General Catherine watched in silence. For all his victories, there was no pride in his eyes, only the cold understanding of what had been necessary. "They're broken," Catherine said, breaking the silence. "I can see it in their eyes. They have no fight left." Kane's gaze didn't waver. "It's not the ones in the streets I'm worried about. It's the ones hiding in the dark corners." Catherine turned, feathers ruffling as he gave Kane a sharp glance. "The war's over, Kane. What's left of their military is scattered across the far colonies. Without Xerath, there's no one left to lead them." Kane finally turned to meet Catherine's gaze. "Xerath may be dead, but his legacy isn't. A broken empire is dangerous, General. The harder they fall, the more fanatics rise from the rubble. Someone will try to carry the torch." Catherine frowned but didn't argue. Kane's predictions had been unsettlingly accurate so far. "You've already thought this through," Catherine said with a sigh. "Haven't you?" Kane nodded. "I have. The war may have ended, but humanity isn't finished with the Krell. Krell Outer Rim, Korthos Drift. Far from the shattered remains of Keros Prime, a battered fleet drifted through the icy silence of the Korthos Drift. These were the remnants of the Dominion's elite, battle-hardened commanders who had escaped the fall of their homeworld. In the heart of the largest dreadnought, a council of surviving Krell warlords convened in a darkened chamber. At the head of the room stood a towering figure, his form shrouded beneath flowing crimson robes, the last of War Marshal Surath's trusted lieutenants, Sarek. Sarek's eyes glowed faintly beneath his hood as he studied the gathered warlords, their faces twisted in frustration and shame. "The Dominion is gone," one of them spat. "Keros Prime burns, our fleets are shattered, and our people scatter like prey. We should fade into the void and survive as we can." A low growl rumbled from Sarek's throat. "You would abandon the Dominion. Let the humans erase everything we built." Another warlord, his body scared and burned from orbital bombardments, leaned forward. "And what do you propose?" "Shirath's pride blinded us. We fought like conquerors when we should have fought like survivors." Sarek's voice darkened, echoing across the chamber. "We were never meant to survive. We were meant to dominate. That hasn't changed." The room fell into uneasy silence. Sarek stepped closer to the center, activating a hologram of the Terran fleet movements in the outer colonies. "The humans believe they've won. They think they can dismantle the Dominion without consequence." His gaze sharpened as he pointed to a cluster of outer rim planets still under Krell control. "But they underestimate us. We still control the fringes. Our colonies remain hidden across the drift. From here, we will rebuild, not as a bloated empire, but as the shadow that haunts them." A warlord sneered. "And how do you propose we strike? Our forces are too few." Sarek's smile revealed rows of serrated teeth. We don't need fleets. We need fear. Humanity fights like tacticians. We will fight like predators. Alliance Occupation Zone. Kairos Prime. Kane's prediction became reality faster than anyone anticipated. It started with whispers, unexplained disappearances in outer colonies, orbital mining ships vanishing without a trace. Then the attacks began. Krell warbands struck isolated Terran outposts with terrifying precision, leaving no survivors. Entire planets went dark overnight. The Krell weren't trying to reclaim territory. They were sending a message. Inside the Galactic Alliance war chamber, Catharin stood beside Kane as reports flooded in from across the sector. The patterns were unmistakable. "They're regrouping," Catharin muttered. "Striking from the fringes, just like you warned." Kane studied the holograms carefully. "Sarek's behind this. I should have known he'd take command after Xeroth fell. He's more dangerous than Xeroth ever was. He doesn't care about rebuilding the Dominion. He wants revenge." Catharin's eyes narrowed. "What do we do?" Kane's voice was grim. "We don't fight this war the same way. We eliminate Sarek before his movement spreads, and we don't give him time to gather strength." Catharin gave a low whistle. "Assassination. That's a dangerous game, even for you." Kane's gaze didn't waver. "Sarek won't stop until he's dead. This war doesn't end until we kill the idea of the Dominion." Korthos Drift. 1 week later. The Ghostwind, humanity's most advanced infiltration vessel, emerged from slip space deep in the Korthos Drift. Its engines barely hummed as it drifted through the icy blue glow of the surrounding nebula. On board, Kane and Blake prepared for insertion. Blake glanced toward Kane, his expression grim. "I thought we were finished with this, Ambassador." Kane smirked as he secured his pulse rifle. "The galaxy's never finished with ghosts, Commander." As the Ghostwind approached the largest Krell dreadnought, Kane's eyes narrowed. Deep inside, Sarek waited, and Kane would ensure that Sarek's shadow never left the drift. The death of an empire. The cold void of the Korthos Drift felt heavier than any battlefield Elias Kane had faced before. Unlike the chaotic skies over Thilon Prime or the burning ruins of Kairos Prime, this was different. There were no massive fleets, no planets in distress, only silence. And in that silence, Kane knew death waited. The Ghostwind glided effortlessly through the swirling blue haze of the nebula, its cloaking systems humming faintly as the ship crept closer to the Krell dreadnought Vengeance of Kairos. The massive organic warship drifted listlessly among the shattered remnants of its escort vessels. Krell ships Kane's operatives had already dismantled in the preceding weeks. "This feels like a trap," Commander Adrian Blake muttered from the pilot's seat. His eyes scanned the drifting debris on the tactical display. The dreadnoughts alone, unescorted. Sarek wouldn't let himself be cornered this easily. Kane didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed on the ship ahead, analyzing the faint power signals emanating from the dreadnought's biocore. The Krell vessel seemed hollow. "He knows we're coming," Kane finally said, fastening his infiltration gear. "But this isn't about avoiding a fight. It's about ending one." Blake glanced at him through narrowed eyes. "You're sure he's on board?" Kane nodded. "Sarek doesn't run. He believes the Krell are destined to rise again. This ship is his throne, and he's not about to abandon it." Blake sighed. "Let's hope you're right." Docking Bay, Vengeance of Kairos. The infiltration was eerily simple. Kane's team slipped aboard through one of the dreadnought's abandoned docking ports, the faint luminescence of Krell biolights flickering along the corridors. No alarms, no guards, only the steady pulse of the ship's heart beating faintly in the distance. Kane, Blake, and 2 other Terran operatives moved in silence, rifles raised, as they advanced deeper into the warship. The corridors twisted unnaturally, with organic growths lining the walls, pulsating as if the vessel itself was alive. "This ship feels wrong," one of the operatives whispered through the comms. "Where are the crew?" Blake's jaw tightened. The Krell aren't known for abandoning ships. Something else happened here. Kane's steps didn't slow. He had read the reports of Krell warbands turning on each other, fracturing into desperate factions. Sarek's crew may have torn itself apart long before the ghost wind arrived. As they pressed deeper, faint echoes drifted through the corridors. Kane's team paused, listening as strange guttural voices carried through the passageways. "Survivors," Blake said. Kane shook his head. "No, loyalists." He motioned for the team to split into formation, advancing toward the source of the voices, the throne room of the dreadnought. They found Sarek in the heart of the dreadnought, the command chamber that once served as the war room for Xerov's greatest campaigns. But Sarek stood alone. The towering Krell warlord faced the large viewport, gazing out at the swirling nebula beyond. His crimson cloak draped over his bioengineered armor, tattered but proud. Around him, the bodies of his fallen lieutenants littered the chamber floor. Kane stepped forward, lowering his rifle slightly but keeping his finger on the trigger. "Sarek," Kane called out, his voice echoing through the chamber. "It's over." Sarek didn't turn immediately. Instead, the warlord let out a low guttural chuckle. "You're bold to come here, human," Sarek finally said, his deep voice reverberating across the chamber. "But you don't understand. The Dominion may be gone, but the Krell are eternal. You cannot kill an idea." Kane took another step forward, eyes cold and unflinching. Ideas don't hold territory. They don't build ships, and they don't survive without leaders. You're the last one standing, Sarek. When you fall, so does the last remnant of the Dominion. Sarek finally turned, his glowing yellow eyes locking onto Kane. The Krell warlord bared his teeth, his jagged grin filled with disdain. "Humans think in such linear ways," Sarek sneered. "You believe victory is achieved by killing the last enemy. But you're wrong. The Dominion will rise again. Not in the form you fear, but in the whispers that haunt your empire. Every colony you destroy, every fleet you shatter. You only plant the seeds of vengeance." Kane raised his rifle. "Then I'll burn the roots." Sarek's laughter echoed through the chamber once more. "You can try." The final duel. Sarek moved faster than Kane anticipated. The Krell warlord lunged across the chamber, his bioblade extending from his gauntlet with a snap of electricity. Kane barely sidestepped the first strike, firing his pulse rifle point blank. The shot glanced off Sarek's armor, but the force staggered him. Blake and the other operatives opened fire, but Sarek weaved between their shots like a phantom. He lashed out, severing one operative's rifle in half before driving his blade into the soldier's chest. Kane narrowed his eyes. Sarek wasn't just a warlord. He was a survivor. Blake threw a concussion grenade, detonating in a flash of light that momentarily blinded Sarek. Kane seized the opportunity, closing the distance and slamming the butt of his rifle into Sarek's jaw. The Krell staggered back, blood seeping from his mouth, but he smiled through the pain. "You fight well for a diplomat," Sarek growled, wiping the blood from his lips. "I've learned from the best," Kane replied coldly. Sarek lunged again, but this time Kane anticipated the move. With a swift sidestep, he drove his knife into the warlord's side, twisting until he felt resistance give way. Sarek stumbled, his breathing ragged as dark ichor oozed from the wound. Kane stepped back, rifle raised once more. "It's over, Sarek. This is humanity's galaxy now." Sarek chuckled weakly, collapsing to one knee. His eyes never left Kane's. "You may have won the war, Kane, but you'll never escape the shadows you've created." Kane's finger tightened on the trigger. "I don't intend to escape. I intend to control them." The final shot echoed through the chamber. Epilogue. The Galactic Summit. Months later, the Galactic Alliance convened to mark the official dissolution of the Krell Dominion. Kane stood before the assembly, his gaze calm but distant. Catherine, standing beside him, addressed the gathered leaders. "The Krell Dominion is no more. Their fleets have been scattered, their leaders eliminated, and with them, a new chapter begins for this galaxy." As the delegates applauded, Kane's eyes drifted toward the stars beyond the chamber's glass ceiling. The war was over, but he knew the truth. There would always be shadows, and humanity would be waiting in them.